Yá'át'ééh, my relatives. Hello, this is Mark Charles. It is Tuesday, February 2nd, 2022, the second day of Black History Month, and I'm sitting down to begin my second cup of coffee. I wanted to thank everybody for being here with me. I'm going to have this be a fairly short cup of coffee. There's several things I want to get out, but I'm planning some other stuff I'm going to be doing tomorrow and Friday. So this one will be a bit more abbreviated. But yeah, before I begin, as I always do, let me start by just acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from what's now known as Washington, D.C., and these are the traditional lands of the Piscataway. And I want to thank the Piscataway for being the indigenous hosts of these lands. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands and just state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. For those who are joining me, and who do we have online so far? I see Pure Pondering, Yá'át'ééh, Pure Pondering. Good morning to Arizona. Actually, over here on the East Coast, it's afternoon. It's about 12:30, but it's still morning. It's 10:30, I think, in Arizona, depending on where you live in Arizona. Some of it follows daylight saving, some of it doesn't. Phil Fox, hey, welcome. Thanks for joining this morning. It's good to have you here. If you've been following me on social media these past few days, you have been noticing I've been tweeting some about, actually last night I put out a bunch of tweets about Abraham Lincoln. And the other day I put out a more robust, one of my more popular, engaging tweets I put out both on Facebook as well as onto Twitter, and I'm going to share a clip for that in the comment section here. I'm sharing it from Instagram, and what I shared was, I said, "Dear Black, Indigenous, and people of color, my relatives, I implore you to not allow white people to get self-congratulatory when they invite or nominate you to be the first person of your race on their stage. Instead of thanking them, tell them it's 2022 and about damn time." That post got a lot of engagement, and a lot of people really resonated with that and agreed with that. And one of the reasons I posted it was because of this pattern that Joe Biden has had throughout his entire campaign and presidency, which is he seems to take a lot of pride and want a lot of credit for being the first president, the first white landowning male president to nominate people of color, women of color to certain roles and certain positions. And while I do not mind him at all, and actually I appreciate the fact that he is intentionally nominating people from the margins into these positions of power, I'm not thrilled about the way he's using these nominations to center himself and to get praise for himself, and to really then distract and limit or even mute the people who are silence the people who he's putting in these positions. Right? If you followed me, you know that when he nominated Deb Haaland as the first cabinet secretary, Native American heritage, he got a lot of buzz about that. But when I watched her confirmation hearings, right, the most pressing questioning she got came from Republican senators. And when she ran as for Congress, you know, she was against fracking, she was against drilling, she was a staunch supporter of Standing Rock, and the Republican senators questioning her forced her essentially to walk back all of those stances, not so they would agree with them, but so they could make sure that she agreed with Joe Biden. Because Joe Biden is not adamantly against drilling. He does support fracking, and he is not a staunch supporter of Standing Rock. And so while he nominated the first Native American woman to be a cabinet secretary, and that's great, he made it very clear by both what he must have told her behind the scenes or what the message was she got, and what he allowed for it to happen to her is that, well, yes, you may come from this marginalized community, you may have run these very progressive platforms when you campaigned, but you're in my administration now and you need to walk back your statements. And so while she may be the first Native American cabinet secretary, Joe Biden has made it very clear she cannot advocate for all the things that she believes in. And as I watch now what's happening with the Supreme Court, and again, when he was campaigning, Joe Biden was trying to get people of color to vote for him. And so he promised he would nominate a Black woman as a Supreme Court nomination if a position opened up. And again, while I do not at all, while I'm grateful that there is a commitment to nominating people of color, especially women of color, into these positions, it has been far too long that people from these demographics have been held out of these positions. By campaigning on it and by not standing for the issues that the people from these marginalized communities truly stand for, and by trying to be credited as the white landowning male who's woke and is doing all these things for these poor marginalized communities, right now the debate is, well, is he just nominating these people from the margins to fill a quota, or is he doing it because they're truly the best candidate? And that's the price, that's the trade-off, right? If you want early credit for being the woke white landowning male who does these things, then the cost of you getting that credit is that the debate becomes not about the credentials and the talents and what these marginalized people bring to the table, but the debate becomes, well, they're there just because they're filling this quota. And so for Joe Biden to elevate himself, he's had to diminish the people that he's nominating, so he can get the credit of being the first white man to nominate people and to put people in these positions. He has to diminish those he's actually trying to prop up or to lift up. And that infuriates me. Absolutely infuriates me. And so, yeah, there's something about, and the fact that this is happening right at the start of Black History Month, and it's starting with the conversations we're having nationally. And so, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll know that late last night, I tweeted something about Abraham Lincoln, and it was one of my first tweets about Black History Month. And I'm going to share that tweet here in the comment section right here, so you can click on it if you want to. I said it's Black History Month, so let's be honest. Abraham Lincoln was an unapologetic, blatant white supremacist and one of the most genocidal presidents in the history of the United States. And then I followed that tweet with several examples where Lincoln basically blatantly stated he was a white supremacist, and through his policies demonstrated that he was committing genocide over Native peoples. And condemning him by his own words and by his own actions. And a lot of people seems to, well, so one question you may be asking is, it's Black History Month, why are you talking about Abraham Lincoln? Right? And if you look at hashtags going on about Black History Month, you'll see obviously the most trending hashtags are Black History Month and Black History Month 2022. But there's a few other trending, or at least more popular hashtags. One is Black History is American History. And another is Black History 365, which is, right, why do we sideline Black history to the shortest month of the year? Why do we have to even single out Black history as being separate from the history of the rest of the country? Why is it not history? This is just history. And one of the reasons why we have to, at the moment, specify Black history and Indigenous history and women's history and all these histories of all these marginalized communities is because the implicit racial bias of this nation is that history is the history of white landowning men, and everyone else has a footnote on them. And so if we really want to get to the point where we can talk about history as truly including Black history, where we can talk about history as truly including history of Indigenous peoples and of women and LGBTQIA2S+ and other marginalized communities, right? If we really want to have history encompass all of these things, we have to first decenter whiteness. And so one of my focuses in this Black History Month is, yes, I want to lift up prominent people and figures who have worked tirelessly and sacrificed much to advance the issues and the needs of African Americans and Black Americans here in our country. But I also want to be very intentional to decenter whiteness. And especially for Black History Month, I want to decenter Abraham Lincoln. Right? If you look on the tweet that I shared yesterday, one of the graphics you'll see I shared is this quote from Abraham Lincoln. This was the Lincoln-Douglas debates in September 1858. Abraham Lincoln is introducing himself to the country. He says, "I will say then I am not, nor ever have been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and Black races," to applause. "That I am not, never have been in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. I'll say in addition to this that there is a physical difference between the white and Black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together in terms of social and political equality. And as long as they must remain together, and as much as they cannot so live while they do remain together, there must be the position of superior and inferior. And I, as much as any other man," said Abraham Lincoln, "am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race." In that same speech, he goes on to basically joke and says, "While I don't want to have a Black person as my slave, I also don't want to have one as my wife." Right? He's a blatant, vile white supremacist. And it sickens me that we honor him in the same month that we lift up and honor Black history. It sickens me. And this is not even discussing his genocide towards Native peoples, which he was actively committing when he was assassinated, and his 13th Amendment, which was passing even after he got assassinated, an amendment that didn't abolish slavery, but constitutionally protected white supremacy and enslavement in our Constitution under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system. So we have to completely divorce Abraham Lincoln from standing with or standing for Black people, or people of color, for that matter. And so I am going to work hard this month to decenter Abraham Lincoln, to deconstruct his mythological legacy, so that we can have a much more open dialogue about the history of this nation. If we have to talk about Black history while still holding Abraham Lincoln in high esteem, we're not going to get very far. He did tremendous damage to the African American community. Yes, he ended chattel slavery. I'm grateful for that. But the systemic racism he embedded into our foundations through the 13th Amendment, the genocide he committed against Native peoples, negates him being eligible for honor or for respect in our nation's history, especially regarding race. So in that vein, over the next month, I'm scheduling a few things. The first will be on February 21st, which is President's Day. Again, this is a day where we honor Lincoln. I'm going to be giving a virtual lecture on my YouTube, probably on Facebook as well, and regarding deconstructing the mythological legacy of Abraham Lincoln. I may rename it before then, I'm not quite sure, but I'm going to give the entire history, the sum of my research regarding Abraham Lincoln. And I'm going to deconstruct this mythological legacy white landowning men have constructed around him. And I'm going to reveal him for the vile, racist, white supremacist, genocidal man that he was. So I don't have the exact time for that lecture yet, but I will be doing that on February 16th, which is on February 21st, which is a Monday, and that's President's Day. For those of you who have been following me for this past month, you'll know I started a few weeks ago a site on Patreon, and I'm going to share a link for that right now. And I'm also doing some lectures on Patreon as well as Q&As and things like that there. I have two tiers right now. One tier just gives you kind of ad-free access to some of my content on YouTube as well as audio files. The second level gives you access to a Q&A, one with myself and one with me and a guest once a month. And I'm going to reveal either 2 or 3 more tiers probably tomorrow, where one of the tiers is going to provide a monthly lecture going into my most up-to-date research on content that I normally speak about. And this month's lecture, which will take place virtually on Patreon, will be around the issue of white nationalism. And I will be talking about how white nationalism is a bipartisan value and helping demonstrate how not only historically, but even current present day, white nationalism is deeply embedded into both the left and the right, the Democrats and the Republicans. And so you can join up on Patreon. I also just confirmed I'm going to have another tier that we're going to unveil this month. It will be a tier of a book study, a virtual book study that will go through over the next year with myself and my co-author, Sing-Chan Ra. And once a month, we're going to take a chapter and have an in-depth virtual study on that chapter. We'll probably have 30 to 40 minutes of teaching and of discussion around that chapter, and then we'll have 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A, and that will be open to the people on Patreon. And so if you're interested in following me on Patreon or supporting my work on Patreon, you can join us there too. Yeah, I want to make sure that people are kind of aware of these things that are going on. I also want to highlight there's a few other things I'm going to be doing coming up in March, and I'm just going to put them both here right now. One is a lecture I do through an organization here in DC, a CCDA ministry called Little Light, and several times a year they offer a race literacy class, anti-racism training. It's like a 10 or 12 week course, I think. And I teach one of those sessions, and I take 90 minutes one of their weeks to talk about the doctrine of discovery. And they're starting registration for a new a class that's starting in the next few weeks, and registration is open for that now. I also want to highlight a lecture I'm going to be giving at the University of Michigan coming up again at the end of March. And this is the 25th annual De Vries van der Kooy Memorial Lecture. It's a Dutch lecture that they offer once a year at the University of Michigan through their Dutch Studies program. And because my mother is of the Wooden Shoe Clan, the organizer of this lecture series follows me on social media and invited me to come and give a lecture this year. And I'm still working on the content of that lecture. It's not promoted yet on their site, but that promotion should be coming out in the next week or so. But one of the things I'm going to be talking about in that lecture is, if you've ever traveled to the Netherlands, you know that much of their country, their land that their nation has, was claimed, literally stolen from the ocean, right, through their series of dikes. There's a proverb that says, God created the world, but the Dutch built Holland. Because they literally claimed this much of their land from the ocean, and they now live beneath massive dikes that are holding back the ocean so that they can have more farmland and just have more land as a nation. And I'm going to talk about how comparing and contrasting that with indigenous living, which is about living in harmony with creation and nature. And then this Dutch way of life, which is literally living in opposition to nature and constructing a nation that is in opposition to the way nature is set up. How that thinking can very easily lead to a colonial history. And we'll look closely at the colonial history of the Netherlands, not only around the world, but even here in the United States. So I'm looking forward to giving that lecture. That will be on March 30. I know it will be in person. We're actually working. I'm trying to press them to have a virtual component so that lecture can be available online, but I don't know if that's going to happen yet, but there should be more information about both that coming out in the next few days. Last, I want to highlight what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow. If you've been following the news, you'll know that Brian Flores, who was with the Miami Dolphins as a coach, he's filed a racial discrimination lawsuit against the NFL. I'm going to share the story about that through NPR in this. And this story, just a few highlights from this. Flores alleges in the suit that the NFL is racially segregated and managed much like a plantation, charging that its 32 owners, none of them whom are Black, profit from the labor of its players, 70% whom are African American. Of course, in response, the NFL released a statement saying it will defend against these claims, which are without merit. And again, this is Black History Month, and I want to have a discussion about this. So tomorrow, I just confirmed just before I started today that my good friend Leroy Barber, who I've known for well over a decade now, and one of my closest friends, he does a lot of work to lift up voices of people of color. And I've wanted to have him on for a second cup of coffee at some point. He's also a very avid NFL fan, and so I invited him. I just called him today or texted him today and asked if he would be willing to join me to have a discussion about this lawsuit, and specifically about the lawsuit, more generally about Black History Month. But he was very willing to come on with me. So tomorrow, probably, I haven't confirmed the time yet, probably around the same time, between 11 and 12 Eastern time, I hope to be on here with my good friend Leroy Barber, and we'll be talking about this discrimination lawsuit and also other components of Black History Month and some of the work Leroy's doing to lift up not only Black voices, but voices of other people of color. I also want to bring in, every year he does Black Santa in the Portland area where he lives, and this actually gets a lot of media attention. So we're going to talk about that too tomorrow. So anyway, join me tomorrow for my second cup of coffee, where I'm going to have a great conversation with my good friend Leroy Barber. I want to thank everybody for joining me on this second cup of coffee today. Let me look through the comments. I got to get going to pick up my daughter from school pretty quickly, but Cheryl Ann Lewis, thanks for joining. Yá'át'ééh, and good morning. Thanks for joining from Portland, the land of the Clackamas and the Cowlitz. Thank you joining Sue this morning and Tam Marshall. Appreciate you being here. I want to thank Brian Alexander for being on here. So Andrew Brown, thanks for being on here. So anyway, I want to thank everyone for joining with me today. I look forward to the discussion we're going to have tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to the conversations we're going to be having. I'm working on having a lot of really engaging guests on my second cup of coffee throughout this entire month, as well as moving forward. And so I'm looking forward to the conversations we're going to be able to engage here. So, my relatives, thanks for joining, and I hope your day is going as good as it can, and I hope you're enjoying your second cup of coffee as I'm enjoying mine. And walk in beauty, and let's learn how to walk in beauty together. And hakon